I
Yay,
began to study judo when I was 10 in Auckland, New Zealand. And I really don't know why I began judo. I just told my dad one day, please join me. So for the first 10 to 20, I was doing judo, and I got my black belt when I was about 17. I represented New Zealand at Oceania level. I had some interesting and challenging experiences as a woman in the 70s, having started in 68. So it was when I was asked by women to teach self-defense. I was primarily a judoka, and I then thought, no, I couldn't really do that, just judo, because it takes many years of application to feel confident. And even then it wasn't, from a psychological view, empowering you to really understand the dynamics of sexual and intimate partner violence. But judo is very tough on the body, and I'm a small person. So I decided I really needed to change my budo, because if I was teaching self-defense and I was injured, I wouldn't be able to do that. So I looked around. I tried Aikido, I tried Tai Chi, I tried Kung Fu, I tried Karate, but none of them got me. And then one day I saw Tony Crawford and his wife Marilyn doing a demonstration, and it was love at first sight. So I started training at the Auckland Mumeshi Club around end of 1980, I think, yeah. My first kendo teacher was Tony Crawford. I later found out through talking to the wonderful departed Sensei Terry Holt, that he was a student of Terry's, and I think he was Shodan when he came to live in New Zealand. It is an interesting historical fact for New Zealand that many of our Budo was started by English migrants who had studied in England. Occasionally we would have a man, more often than not a man, who had maybe in the Japanese occupation quietly picked up some information and started a martial art, but mainly in this case of Tony and another man called Steve in Wellington, they were British migrants who came here, perhaps with burgeoning knowledge at that time, but for whatever, they began Dojo here in New Zealand. And so I was a member around the early 80s. Obviously, the Kendo was at that level. So it's, we imagine a Shodan going out today and teaching Kendo with a little bit of maybe heightened belief of their expertise, then you can imagine that in hindsight, the techniques perhaps weren't so good, but it was good because it got me and many of the other founders of, or ongoing founders of New Zealand Kendo into Kendo, and we stayed. And so it wasn't until we had a visit from Imasato Sensei about a year later that we saw this Japanese man from Kyoto, Graham Sayer, Sensei Graham Sayer. At that stage, Graham was Shodan or Nidan, brought him across for a visit. And I remember myself and Ken Wells and some of the early people thinking, oh, this is interesting, Kendo. Oh, we want to try that. And Imasato Sensei taught us a lot. And when he left, we negotiated Tony's Kendo on a Monday, Japanese Kendo on a Wednesday. And unfortunately, Tony did take exception to that, but we kind of forged on. Also in 1981, I went on a Japanese Youth Goodwill cruise, Seinen no Fune. I was a youth leader for the YWCA, and I was able to experience over a period of 6 weeks Kendo and Judo and Cha-no-yu on the boat. It was an amazing experience, and it really gave me a great round experience of all those three do, particularly Kendo. And it was there that it reinforced to me how wonderful Chanto Kendo could be. So eventually, there became a sort of a break in the teaching, and Tony kept teaching, and the Auckland Kendo Club was formed as a result of the desire to increase our knowledge of good kendo. Yes, Graham Sayer was a judo man, and this is the other aspect of developing kendo in English-speaking countries, is often it was judo guys who stuffed up their knees and went to kendo, and they often, I know that Ron Bennett in Australia was a judo man, and Graham Sayer was a judo man, and at some point he changed to kendo in Japan when he was living there. So he had brought Imazato Sensei across. Obviously I'd made friends with Graham, and he and Imazato Sensei were encouraging Kiwis to go across to Japan on a bunka visa. So Imazato Sensei would sponsor us on the bunka visa, the cultural visa. And so I'd by this stage been teaching a lot of women's self-defense. It was at an interesting stage of New Zealand's history in relation to women being able to speak out about sexual violence and intimate partner violence or domestic violence. And it wasn't being dealt particularly well by the police and legislation. So believe it or not, around 20,000 women a year all over New Zealand in classes of up to 40, and I was burning out. So I trained a bunch of women to be instructors. So I'd written a book on self-defense, and I felt like a break. So I'd made enormous contacts from my Sanenu Fune group. I had a list of friends. This is all before social media, I might add. This is, snail mail and phone calls and things. So fortunately, Graham was able to give me a place to live initially. And so I decided to move to Japan. I think initially my idea was to go across for maybe 6 months or a year. I knew very little Japanese, apart from Kendo Japanese, and ended up over in Japan. And I was grandparented into Graham's dojo, that was Kodokan Dojo in Kitaku, Kyoto. Unfortunately, I've heard that dojo has since disbanded. It's really, really sad. And obviously I went to Butokaden on many occasions and had the delight of experiencing Gogatsu Taikai when I was in my early 20s, and getting up at, what we say in New Zealand, sparrow's fart, to go to the morning practices. So it was, I felt very privileged. I was able to go to Imazato Sensei's children's classes, which were excellent because it's in the children's classes that you learn the Kihon. By the time you get to the university dojo in the 80s, there's no Kihon, it's repetition and it's rugged and ruthless. So that was quite a very good experience for me. That was interesting because it felt, I had done, whilst I was in Japan, I was able to do 2 of the Saitama Gashiku, the International Foreigners Kendo camps, and I'd gone to Paris for the first World Kendo tournament where New Zealand put in a team. So it was a really, there was so amazing opportunities to do Kendo every day of the week. I had a great experience, and I came back to this newly formed Auckland Kendo Dojo, and and with Tony still doing his Mameshi. And so I returned with a partner who was also doing Kendo, and we went to the Auckland Kendo Club, which was at the Auckland, Auckland, a private school, but Auckland Girls College. And it was an interesting situation where we came back of similar grade to a Japanese man who was taking the club. And the situation was a bit odd, because it always is when you have the sort of clash of culture and ways of doing things. And I have always been a very assertive person. And to cut a long story short, we came back, and then he decided to go and teach in another part of Auckland. And I found out one night by showing up with nobody there except 2 new students. So we went into the dojo and started teaching these 2 new students, and then just kept going from there. So the dojo built up from there. Yes, I would go back and say that going back to Mr. Crawford's days, when us students wanted more of the Japanese kendo as opposed to what he called the ping pong kendo, I got the blame. So there was definitely about 3 or 4 of us, but I was the person who got most of the blame about this sort of usurping situation. Didn't bother me because you have to have a bit of a hard hide in those early days. A next challenge for me obviously was, perhaps I challenged this Japanese male. There was just some behavior I didn't feel was, like, for example, you and I are accustomed to going to a dojo in Japan, in the sense they will go across the floor and he will change into his gi and his keiko gi and stuff. But in the context of New Zealand, where we had a lot of teenage girls in the class, I really didn't find that appropriate. And he would come in carrying a sword, a katana, which wasn't used at all throughout the practice. There was no kata done with this or anything like that. So I don't know, it just felt, to me, it felt not right. So, and again, I ended up with sort of an empty dojo, but built it up. A next challenge I personally had was when the Auckland dojo decided to get a leased venue, which was actually a fantastic thing, but I noticed that they had a very big male changing area, and they had like a closet for the women with no toilets in the women's room, absolutely no shower. So it was almost a very, very small place. And so I said, how are you going to encourage women into kendo when you've got that? Oh, we haven't got many women kendo. I said, well, you're never going to get any women in kendo if you're going to have them in the closet. And there'd be this embarrassing moment where at the end of practice, women would maybe be allowed to shower in the men's area and quickly, and then go out to the closet to get dressed. And, by this stage, I've been doing nearly 20 years of Budo, and it's like, surely we got to move on from this, And so actually it led me to stopping kendo. I felt very disenfranchised, and I stopped kendo for several years because I did not want to go to a dojo where I had no proper training room. New Zealand women's kendo. Well, I would say that it's developed very well. Obviously, from my days, Tony's wife, Marilyn, was an original kendo person. I don't know if she was the first woman to do kendo. During my time, we had a few women do kendo as well. In Auckland, there were groupings of women doing kendo, but it didn't really warm up until, I'd say, this century. We do have some great female instructors. We have Sam and Marlene, in Hamilton, and so they were Taiwanese migrants that came here. Oh, I'm not sure when, but I came back, I think they were in the 80s or maybe the 90s. And so they've established a really strong dojo and have many females there, including daughters. So we're getting a lot of daughters. So Akio Yamaguchi Allen Sensei recently passed Rokudan. She came to New Zealand, I think, in the zeros and has 2 daughters who I think will also be shining lights in the future alongside with Marlene and Sam's daughter Joyce. And so if you were to measure it by gradings, we are building up. We've got 2 Rokudan in New Zealand, 1 Godan, no, maybe more than 1 Godan. I'm not sure. No, definitely Marlene is Godan. Alice is Yondan, and I'm not sure, I think might be, yeah, Haruko. Yeah, we've got several Yondan. So we're getting our, and remember, we're a country with about 250 people who train Kendo. If we go by the World Kendo Champs, Satchio Lee won a fighting spirit in Glasgow, and I think that was 2003, which is fantastic. We've had women teams in most world champs since we had world teams for women. And where I dusted off my Shiai skills in 2012 and went to Novara, and we got into the top sort of 10 area at that time, and it was a very good moment for us. Alex Bennett Sensei was a very good coach. After that, he in New Zealand Federation asked me to coach. Unfortunately, we had a lull. In 2015, we only had Akio as our representative. But then by 2018, we had a strong team. We also started the process, which we were doing with the men, of having apprentices. So we'd have the males from 2012 had 2 young apprentices in their teenage years, and they were kind of being nurtured to go into the possibility of being selected, and it was quite successful. So we decided to start that with females, and so we did have Rosa and Sui as apprentices for 2018. And I think obviously 2018 was a fantastic year for Australasia, because we had Kate getting the Australian women's team to the 3rd position, and we had our team, we had a fight off with the Netherlands. Unfortunately, they won by literally the 1 point, but it was a great experience for us. So, and Haruko Suzuki also got a fighting spirit in that team as our captain. So I was very proud of how we developed in New Zealand Kendo. What makes it worthwhile for me is that I feel lucky that I've gone to a martial art that is relatively, when I say relatively, easy on the body. We've all had our injuries, don't get me wrong, but I guess compared to karate and judo, where I see some quite excessive injuries occurring, then I think and I've seen and I've had examples of sensei 80s, 90s doing kendo with grandchildren kind of thing. I think this is fantastic generationally to be able to do this. And also I think kendo is something you can modify. So for a while I had a very unusual injury and I couldn't fumikomi, but I could still do kendo. You know, sure, it stuffed up one of my gradings, but you know, well, whatever. So it's not like some other areas. So as I grow older and mature, I may not be going with the same vigor, I used to have, but the wisdom accumulated means that I feel that I can still put that to great use. I guess it's hard to step out of my gender and guess what that is. I guess I'm very aware of when women start kendo, the nurturing that they require. Just to give an example, it's not kendo, but it was when I was studying karate, we were doing press-ups. And although I was in my early 20s, a teenage girl said, and so we are now in 1980, the teenage girl says, oh, I'm not doing press-ups. And I said, why? She said, my father says it makes me infertile. I said, well, if that's the case, thousands of women would be doing press-ups and not taking the pill. Because what a better situation than not taking the pill. And it was like, you know, some of these weird thoughts that women have, often fed to them, that they can't do this, or yelling is ungainly and unfemale, and you know, so I like to try and very much nurture, I mean, all kenshi who come, but you know, in the changing room, you've got the blokes talking bloke. You don't have many females talking female. I'll never ever forget at one of the recent Saitama camps that I went to, having a woman sensei come along and show us how to wear gi and keiko gi as a woman. And I was like, oh, wow, wow. You know, I've been doing kendo for 30 some years by this point. And that was remarkable. And we've had many conversations with the Bennett brothers about creating do that's better for women, you know, in relation to our specific needs. I mean, you know, to have something that's more particular for us, or gi with more strengthening around the side here for the odd dough cut that you get on the, you know, for women, ladies who have larger breasts that get cut around here. So I think there's some interesting stuff around that. Well, isn't COVID a funny thing? 2 years ago, well, actually, I have to say, we used to have every year, every 2 years, there used to be a Oceania women's camp that Kate and Hayami Abutleb Sensei and many others put together, and it was, I've been a couple of times, amazing, wonderful. And also New Zealand used to have, we've done it 2 or 3 times, an Australasian Shiai in the lead up to the World Champs, which was fantastic, because down here in Australasia, we don't have a plethora of countries to practice kendo with. We don't, you know, drive for a couple of hours and get to Europe, or we don't have other South American countries that we can easily mesh up with. So we rely on us going to places, or our cousins across the ditch, as we would say. So obviously since COVID, we've had, we're all, every one of us, in our own little cocoon. So I think that prior to COVID, we were actually developing really well. In fact, on March 26th last year, we were going to have a female camp. So Akio and I are women's development officers for New Zealand Kendo Federation, and that's a really great role to have a women's development officer. So we had done a women's training camp, of which Hayomi came across for, and with Kodama Sensei, from our wonderful Ozawa Sensei, Kobukan Dojo, and that was in 2013, I think. And that women's camp really, I think, contributed to women's kendo taking off. And so having a bit of cross-pollination from high grade sensei, and also with the English side of things, was really useful. Now we're in a bit of a fug, I'd say. Women are probably practicing as best they can, waiting for whatever, it's 2023, I think, isn't it? Or so I guess we'll just have to take this lull in international kendo in our stride and keep working on our own waza and our own development for grading. So in New Zealand last year, I think we had 2 gradings, one in Auckland and one that I and Akio organised in the Christchurch, and 1 Shiai, which was the Rembuden Taikai, which was amazing. It was in October last year. We probably estimated it was one of the few Shiai in the world happening, and we had about 35 competitors, down from 70. But it was really good to see the younger women fighting there. I think what's important for women's kendo is to be taken seriously, is to be acknowledged, is to be nurtured. Women are often not given consideration, extra consideration. So I make the point, as a woman goes through her kendo career, she might start when she's a student, very low income. She starts a job. This job is paid less than males get paid, generally. We have evidence to prove this. As she develops up the career or whatever, she may have a child. Automatically, that puts her back here in terms of income and ability to do her kendo, right? And this is where we lose a lot of women. We're still losing a lot of women at this point. Then you've got a cohort of women like Akio, who and Marlene, and Liz Dutton, who've had children but continue to do their kendo. And I'm not saying that a woman who takes, goes is a problem, but how do we address this? So I find that, for example, when we're looking at the costs of things or financial support of things, that men base this on a high income with no issues around children, with no childcare, even though they're dads, they've got their wives. And, obviously it gets different when it's a couple and all the rest of it. But I find that there's no awareness or acknowledgement of the different challenges that women have financially and time-wise. Like, for example, even some of my university students in the women's team, it's often harder for them. They've got less income in their part-time job. It's harder for them to be assertive with their universities to say, I need the time off to go to the Skashiku. Can I get this extra time? Because it's just a little bit harder for them to be assertive. So as a coach at that time, I would try and say, let me communicate with your university. Let me, whereas if it's a male for an international martial art, it's like, okay, yeah. I mean, I'm generalizing here. It might not be every case, but it's just a lot easier, even now in this world, for competitive, elite sportsmen. And yes, when you're dealing with with the world kendo champs, to me that's elite. You're working at your national kendo competitions. You're an elite athlete. So I think it's time for us as a budo to be taken seriously as an elite sport, even though I don't like using the term sport, but to make that comparison. And so as a female, women doing martial arts generally are often, really? Why? And so we're still coming into this world of you know, we're up there. This is important. This is valuable for us. And it develops us as a human being, and it develops our children as well. Kendo is a philosophy, it's a spirituality, it is a stress release, it is a family, an international family and friendship. It is a technical way of learning and keeping my brain and body ticking over. And sometimes it is a bother. I was doing some calculations in my head the other day. As a woman who started in the 80s, 30 of my 40 years of doing kendo, I've been teaching. So 2 years ago, Liz and I made the decision to hand over to our junior students who are in their Sandan Yondan, nearing Gordon, because it's easy to have a dojo hinged only on you as the teachers. And I was getting very, you know, tired of doing that kind of teaching all the time. And also as a hit by the bus theory, how is the dojo going to keep on going if it's only us doing everything? Of course, we've had treasurers and secretaries and people to collect the money and all that kind of thing. So we did hand over to a little cluster of students, and Blake Bennett came in and did some really good coaching training, which he's very good at. And it's quite interesting, to be honest, that recently there's been a little crisis, because it's ended up kind of on the plate of one person, with the others, you know, having this thing and that thing and that thing. And this is how we felt for years. And I think that in itself is a challenge for international non-Japanese kendo, where, you know, you've got the kohai kind of senpai in its positive sense operating, whereas here it often ends up with just that one or two, and you end up doing a lot. And who does this if you're sick? Who does this if you're feeling bleh, you know, or you've just got super busy at work? And so I think maintaining an ability to keep a dojo healthy and operative in a holistic way is important. Well, wahine toa is a Maori expression called strong female warriors, and so that's what I consider women who pick up their shinai, and sometimes against challenges from their male compatriots or set thoughts, have endured negative experiences in the dojo. They've potentially experienced put downs in a way that they shouldn't, that they don't belong to the boys club. I would love to think that that's changing, and I do believe it's changing. But I think it's important for women to make sure they keep in contact with their sisters in kendo, whether that's in their own dojo, if there are many, or with other women. So the wonderful nature of social media is that we've started your magnificent magazine and platform. We've had female, other female Facebook pages and so on and so forth. So I think that's magnificent. I think that's a good change, that female kenshi can now, via our internet, find out an enormous amount of information. And I encourage them to seek that out, and don't feel alone if they happen to be the only female in the dojo or the only one in the age group or anything like that. To seek information, to not be shy, to ask other female sensei for advice, and if they are experiencing any form of harassment, to come to us. If they feel safe with their the sensei of the dojo. Clearly they need to address it with them privately, but they can also, you know, seek out female sensei to feel, you know, have a chat and all the rest of it. And it's terrible that I'm still saying this in 2021, but I do think it is still relevant. Yeah, don't be hindered, don't be limited by you're a girl, he's stronger, he's taller. We have some unique abilities to do things, and the other thing is, if you ever have a time when you think, oh my God, it's just too much. If you do take a break, in your head, click off, okay, I'm going to give it 6 months, then I'm going to go back. Don't just think it's over. Don't have a child and think I'm never going to be able to come back. You know, have your kid and think, well, okay, I'm going to try and do this, and see how my dojo will support me. Don't think that because you're having a child that the world of kendo is no longer open to you. I think there's lots of ways you can be involved, even if it's being a secretary, being on the board for the shiai and taking notes. You know, these are being a timekeeper. These are all things that we can keep you involved with in this martial art. So I know that as I grow older and I'm learning more about post-menopausal physiological development, that there's nothing better than doing a contact martial art to keeping up your bone stamina, your musculature. And so this is something I feel I can take into my older age. Other thing I'd suggest is to do kendo, but do other stuff. Because if your body's been doing this, you know, the same movement, you need to actually have other stuff. Like I do outrigger paddling, I bicycle, I walk. I've got dreams of doing other stuff, you know, outside, badminton or thing that will challenge my body in a different way. So I keep it, because when you've been doing the same thing for 40 years, you know, you're going to be using that same aspect. So it's good to do other sports or activities that keep you rounded.